presenter, I can skip the agenda part and just tell you this is going to be Robert Sharp. Ready, Robert? All right. 10:15 is good. We're running a little over. We'll try to get it all done by 9.
Hi, I'm Bob Sharp. I have a blog and podcast on creativity, which you can find at explodingcreativity.com. This presentation is basically a summary of what you can find on that website. And it's more on the general topics on creativity, maybe not so much on any one specific thing, but hopefully there's a good correspondence with the other websites. Try to be brief. I'm an inventor with a couple of patents, an entrepreneur and a consultant, and I have a background in electrical and software engineering. Creativity is a very fascinating subject to me, I think in part because you can look at it in so many different ways. You can look at it in terms of brain anatomy, psychology, you can look at different techniques. And I'll be touching on these type of things as I go through the presentation. And if these topics are of interest to you, I encourage you to visit the website there and look up the topic, and you can dig more in depth into it. Well, to start off, let me give you a good book recommendation. Michael Michalko's Thinker Toys. If I had to buy one book on creativity, I think I would buy this. There's a lot of different creativity techniques. Another book I like is The Creative Spirit by Daniel Goleman, Paul Coffin, and Michael Ray. This isn't so much a book on creativity techniques, but a lot of good information on general information like creativity in children, how to apply creativity in school environment and workplace, and among many other topics. So here's a couple of definitions of creativity. The first one is the flash of insight definition, which I think is what most people think of when they think of creativity. The creativity techniques that you read about in Michalko's books, these are to help facilitate the flash of insight. The other definition is also very important. This is creativity as a process, and this is where that flash of insight is just one step in the creative process. I liked Adrian's presentation because that's really a process where you can develop an idea. That's a good creativity process. Some creativity techniques are themselves already processes like brainstorming, and you can modify those as you need. Another process you may want to think about is maintaining an idea pipeline. That might be more appropriate for a more established type of business to keep innovations ongoing. And for time constraints, I'll leave it there, but if that's of interest to you, definitely check that out on the website. Here's some characteristics of creativity. In general, people who are in positive moods and in positive environments tend to be more creative than people who are in negative moods and negative environments. People who are well-rested tend to be more creative than people who are not. Productivity is a key characteristic of creativity, and Adrian talked about this. Do something, right? If you don't do anything and you don't actually create something, can you say you're being creative? Part of productivity is a tolerance of risk and a tolerance of failure. Things like failure and accidents themselves can be opportunities, and that's called serendipity, and a characteristic of that is being observant, so you can identify those type of opportunities.
The old saying, necessities and ways of invention.
That's right. I mean, there's a lot of characteristics, and that's definitely one of them. Looking at a little bit of brain anatomy, and I really like this. The Triune brain model looks at the brain as 3 distinct evolutionary parts. The mid part of the brain is associated with emotions. It's also associated with creativity. And I think that's why we can say that people in positive emotions tend to be more creative than people who are not. The outside of the brain is the youngest part of the brain in terms of evolution, and that's called the neocortex. For us, it takes about 2/3 of our total brain mass. And it is the neocortex that's divided into the left and right hemispheres. The left brain is more logical, it's more rational and verbal. The right side of the brain is more linear, it's more spatial and abstract, it's more musical and artistic. And as the right side of the brain thinks in pictures, and it's where flashes of insight are seen to occur, a good way to stimulate that side of the brain and to facilitate the flashes of insight is to use visualization and drawing techniques. And I'll talk a little bit about drawing techniques a little bit later. Psychologist Howard Gardner came up with the theory of multiple intelligences, and he identified these 7 different intelligences that we all have in varying degrees. You will be the most creative in the areas that you have the highest intelligence in. Outside of these intelligences, you'll be the most creative in the areas that you have the most experience in, that you are the most passionate about, and you're the most persistent in. Now, it turns out for creativity, if you study something that you're not familiar with, that can help enhance your creativity in areas that you are already strong in, and that's an application of diversity. Diversity is a way to help us think differently on the subject, and it helps perhaps helps us to get a more creative outlook on that subject. There are ways to apply diversity to yourself as well as to a team. An interesting way to apply diversity to yourself is a very simple technique. You go to a bookstore, buy a magazine on a topic that you're not familiar with, and as you're going through that magazine, you'll be learning about things you might not have otherwise learned about, different contexts, different techniques, different people and how they work, and you might be able to apply that to the areas that you're working in. There are many ways to apply diversity to a team. Procter & Gamble and Google did that. I thought it quite interesting. They actually swapped employees, right? Procter & Gamble hired Google to help them with their advertising, and they thought, well, let's just swap employees, and that will help them to help each other. I'm not sure how successful that was. I think the recession hit. Yeah. How we interact with other people has a huge impact on those people's creativity. We can act in ways that inhibit their creativity or enhance their creativity. And this is especially true with leadership. A very important part of leadership is to select people to interact with. And not all teams have to be created for purposes of creativity, but for those that do, you'll want to select people who are creative, as well as people who work well together. And as far as how do you tell if someone's creative or not, if you don't know that, a couple of indicators have been suggested. One is a mastery in something, and it could be anything. It could be a mastery in sport, it could be a mastery of a musical instrument, it could be mastery of circuit design or object-oriented programming, and that might be ideal if that's what you want them to do. Other